Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be part of my What Were We Wearing series. I look back 30, 25, 20, 15, 10 and 5 years ago, and I just look at the biggest fragrance releases each year and tell you what we were wearing all of those years ago. So if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith. I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history, perfume psychology, and I also just do some straight perfume reviews and also fun perfume tags. So if that kind of thing interests you and you haven't already done so, then please do consider subscribing, and please also like this video if you do like this kind of content. So I made a similar video to this back in 2023 and also in 2024. So if you do want to check out those videos, you can do. I'll leave them linked down below. But basically those videos were covering different years and different fragrances. So this is a fresh, brand new video in the series. So whilst I'm walking you back 30 years, I'm also going to just tell you what was going on in the world at the time, because that can really influence fragrance. So I'm going to talk about what we were watching at the cinema, what we were wearing, what we were listening to, and also really what was just going on in the world. So let's get on with this. Let's go 30 years back and start in 1995. So in 1995, I was only 11 years old and I just started secondary school. And really in the UK, John Major was the Prime Minister and Bill Clinton was the President of the US. The thing I distinctively remember about that year was the fact that people were just mesmerised by the trial of O.J. Simpson. That trial was even televised partially in the UK, so it really was something that was of global interest. At the cinema that year, we were watching Woody and also Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story. We were watching Mel Gibson cry freedom in Braveheart. And we were also watching Brad Pitt in Seven. Musically, in 1995, the world was full of Britpop, so Blur, Oasis were having their little fight off, but also Coolio had a massive hit with Gangsta's Paradise. In the world of fashion, Calvin Klein was extremely popular, really simplistic lined clothing, and also grunge styles were increasingly popular. So which fragrances were we wearing? Well, when I looked back at my collection, I really didn't have many from 1995. In fact, I only had one from 1995, and this one was Cerruti 1881. So this is a really soft, aquatic feeling floral fragrance in the opening, but really it turns into a powdery, pastel feeling fragrance very quickly. It's got mimosa and it's just got this kind of feeling of envelopment, really. Clearly this has been reformulated over the years, but I really do think this is a slice of the 90s for me. Also back in 1995, a certain Mr. Kirkdejan was starting off his career at Jean-Paul Gaultier, and he had just formulated a fragrance called Le Malle. Le Malle was an immense smash hit, and it really took quite a unique combination of mint, vanilla and lavender, and made it into quite a metrosexual, very 90s style fragrance, something that really channeled what was going on in the world at the time. And this fragrance is still churning out flankers today. It's really the pillar fragrance along with Classique of the Jean-Paul Gaultier fragrance line, and I think it's something that's going to continue well into the future. Also in 1995, Lancome had a hit with Poeme. So Poeme is distinctive because it has a narcissus note, and narcissus is relatively rare in fragrance these days. So this is a yellow and white floral kind of feeling fragrance with a slight powderiness, but it has a very rich golden tone to it. It does feel like a very rich, heady floral, this one. And finally from 1995, Estee Lauder's Pleasures was also released that year. And this really is a Lily of the Valley fragrance. It's slightly green. It's also got some very fresh pink rose in it. And also it's got a musky dry down, some woodiness, and even a slight greenness about it. It's a cool and clean feeling fragrance. That's Estee Lauder Pleasures. So next we're back to 25 years ago and the year 2000. And actually in the UK, Tony Blair was Prime Minister and Bill Clinton was in the White House. The summer of 2000 marked the first copy of the draft human genome being published. And I remember Bill Clinton sitting there with the books, the actual printed books of the sequence of the human genome. This had been a huge project that had taken 10 whole years and cost $2.7 billion. And really this paved the way for modern sequencing techniques. And nowadays we can sequence a genome in less than a day, and it costs less than $100 at scale, which I think is just an amazing leap forward in 25 years. So 2000 was also the year that the Nokia 3310 was released, and I remember just being completely obsessed with Snake. I don't know if anybody else played Snake, but it seems such a simple game now. But yeah, anybody else had a 3310? So back in 2000, we were wearing cargo pants with loads and loads of different pockets, which looks kind of ridiculous. But we were also wearing really low slung jeans, which also looked ridiculous. If you were there at the time and you actually suffered the ordeal of trying to buy a new pair of jeans that actually covered everything that needed covering, then please let me know down below. In the cinema in 2000, we were watching films such as Gladiator with Russell Crowe, Tom Hanks Make Friends with the Football in Castaway, and also we were watching X-Men. Music-wise, we were listening to Kylie, Spinning Around, and also Eminem had a huge hit with Dido with Stan. Britney also released Oops, I Did It Again, and Coldplay had their first album, Parachute. So when I checked my own collection for fragrances released in 2000, there was really only one left in my collection, and that one is Lipstick Rose by Frederic Malle. I think Frederic Malle actually started his brand back in 2000, and I think this was released along with a few others, including Musk Ravageur, which has really stood the test of time. This fragrance is the ultimate lipstick kind of scent. It has violet and iris, and it just has this kind of powdery old school glamour feel about it, but also some rose and some vanilla. So I've also finished a few fragrances that came out in 2000, and the first one of these is Lancome's Miracle. So this fragrance was originally advertised by Uma Thurman, and I always think of this fragrance as something that smells appropriate for someone wearing a crisp white shirt. It has a freshness to it, but also a floral aspect to it, and it has a texture in the dry down. It has a slight spicy warmth, but also an aquatic coolness about it. It's a really interesting contrast with Miracle, and it does smell very much of the time of the 2000s. It's very fresh and clean. So that's Miracle by Lancome. So back in 2000, we also got the debut fragrance from Agent Provocateur, and this one is weirdly called Agent Provocateur. So this fragrance is a spicy, strong rose musk fragrance. It has a powderiness to it and also a slight naughtiness to it somehow. I would think of this fragrance as something a dominatrix might wear. It is just incredibly boudoir and film noir almost to me, this one. So that's Agent Provocateur by Agent Provocateur. Another one from 2000, which I think takes a lot of people back to that year, especially in the US, is Ralph by Ralph Lauren. So this fragrance is a fruity, so it's apple and also some citrus, along with some white florals, some smooth aquatic feeling white florals such as magnolia. And this fragrance I just think is one that is very high school for a lot of people. It's something that was quite affordable at the time, I think, and probably was quite popular. So Ralph by Ralph Lauren is also another fragrance from 2000. Also released that year is another classic white floral, and that's a gardenia white floral in the form of Michael Kors Michael, which went on to inspire Kim Kardashian's fragrances. She is notorious for her love and use of gardenia in her fragrance lines. Also released in 2000 and still going strong is Origins Ginger Essence. I remember this one smelling so strongly of ginger that it would make me and my friend sneeze when we would spray it on the Origins counter in Debenhams. It was just so distinctively ginger, and I think it's still made, but I haven't smelt it recently. I'd love to go and smell it again. So now back to 20 years ago, and back in 2005, I was 21 and I was working for the police. I'd just left uni, I couldn't get a job, so I went to work for the police. I was some kind of admin assistant in one of their offices. So 2005 also saw the launch of Google Maps and also of YouTube, something that we all can't really imagine life without now. So in 2005, Tony Blair was Prime Minister in the UK, and also we had George W. Bush in the White House. Back then we were all wearing skinny jeans and band t-shirts, and we were also getting into the boho trend. In the cinema we were watching big blockbuster films such as The Chronicles of Narnia, Batman Begins, and Star Wars Episode 3. For music, we were listening to Green Day's Boulevard of Broken Dreams, Kelly Clarkson, and also the Black Eyed Peas. So in 2005, the big news was that Thierry Mugler had created a second female marketed fragrance. Yes, an alien had dropped to Earth, and this is one of the original refill bottles from around that time. You can see, well, you probably can't see the juice, but it is dark, dark red. And actually, I also have This other bottle from slightly later, the juice is slightly less red but still quite dark. And then if you look at the modern formulation, it's pretty much clear. So yeah, lots of Alien going on in my life. The original Alien really was a jasmine unlike any other, and it has that really distinctive musky cashmeran and amber, and it leaves such a distinctive trail. I always think of Scented Snowdrops here on YouTube, John, when I think of Alien, because he's always telling the story of how he chased a woman down the street in a non-threatening manner to just ask her what she was wearing, because he was so mesmerised by her fragrance when he first smelled Alien. So really that tells you everything, doesn't it? Also back in 2005, it was a huge year for celebrity fragrances. We had quite a few hits in 2005. And from the fragrances in my own collection, one that I've used up is SJP's Lovely. So this fragrance is a woody, musky feeling lavender fragrance. It always makes me think of clean hotel sheets, this one. This fragrance actually won a fragrance award, and it also is by the same perfumer who would later make Ariana Grande's Cloud. The same perfumer had hits with two different celebrity fragrances. Also released back in 2005 was a fragrance from Britney Spears, and I think this is her most famous fragrance really. It's Fantasy. Fantasy outsold her first fragrance by quite some margin, and it's still being produced today. This is really a fruity, gourmand vanilla. So it starts off with some kiwi very distinctively, and then it dries down into this kind of cupcakey, very gourmand feeling vanilla with a slight powderiness as well to it. Really distinctive and very much along the lines of other celebrity fragrances at the time that were going down towards a gourmand style really. That really was where celebrity fragrance was going in the mid-2000s. 2005 was also a very classic year in male marketed perfumery. So if we think about probably the most popular men's fragrance ever, I would say this one. I really feel like this gets voted as the best ever fragrance quite often. So this is Dior Homme, and this is the original version from 2005. This is really iris done to perfection, and I think this one is still very highly regarded by many people and loved and missed. Dior were on a roll in 2005, and they also gave us Miss Dior Cherie, which I think is a lot of people's favourites of the Miss Dior line. So Miss Dior Cherie had the very distinctive popcorn note and also the strawberry note, which I think a lot of people would love to see return to the Miss Dior line. But that fragrance is sadly discontinued, but it was extremely popular and is still talked about today. Also released in 2005 was the very distinctive, very interesting floral vanilla from Lancome, Hypnose. So Hypnose, to me, distinctively had a very kind of almost licoricey, anisey feel to it, but also it has that really striking, interesting passion flower note, which is something that I've not really smelled elsewhere. It's a very interestingly textured fragrance, that one, and well worth sniffing if you get the chance to find a vintage bottle. So that's Hypnose by Lancome. So looking back at my own collection from 2005, I think the one that stood out to me was Jo Malone's Pomegranate Noir. This is an incredibly long-lasting fragrance for Jo Malone, and it's one that I really enjoy. This is a dry-feeling, fruity, woody fragrance, but with a ton of cloves. And the cloves here make this feel very appropriate for wintertime. It always makes me think of hedgerows. It also makes me think a little bit of booze, weirdly. But it's just a really distinctive fragrance, and just, as I've said, very long lasting for Jo Malone, especially for the non-cologne intense line. So that's Jo Malone's Pomegranate Noir. Other classics released that year include Moschino's I Love Love, which is really widely regarded as a partial dupe of Light Blue by Dolce & Gabbana. Also released is Carnal Flower by Frederic Malle, a really tropical feeling tuberose fragrance. Really a very special tuberose if you haven't smelt it. And also Calvin Klein's Euphoria, a very distinctively different feeling fragrance from his other offerings of around the same time. So next, 2010. And 2010 was the year of the Icelandic volcanic eruption that basically grounded all flights that January and really messed with food supplies for Europe for quite some time, actually, after the volcanic eruption had calmed down. Also in 2010, Gordon Brown lost the election in the UK just because he hadn't realised his microphone was on when he was talking about somebody else. David Cameron and Nick Clegg finally formed a coalition government as a replacement, and ultimately it was just a really interesting time in politics in the US, with Barack Obama having just settled into his White House position. With regard to fashion, we were all channeling people like Alexa Chung and her very preppy look, but also we were still hanging on to our skinny jeans and also denim skirt. With music, we were mainly listening to Lady Gaga, but Train did have a massive hit with Hey Soul Sister. In the cinemas, we were watching Toy Story 3. Yeah, 15 years on from the original instalment, they brought out Toy Story 3. In the world of fragrance, niche brands were really taking over and becoming more well known. We were really producing the brands of the future that would be the mass market niche brands that we all see today. So back in 2010, we did have some quite big niche releases, and I feel that's what drove that market share. So Creed's Aventus was released and really became a sensation, inspiring lots of clones and dupes of that fragrance. So that's a smoky birch, citrus and kind of pineapple fragrance with a bit of apple. It's a really very distinctive fragrance, and even if you don't think you've smelt it, you've probably smelt a clone or a dupe. It's something you couldn't have escaped the last 15 years without smelling some form of. Also released on the niche market in 2010 was Juliette Has a Gun. This was really a molecular fragrance, specifically marketed, more so marketed to women. And that really took it in a different direction to the eccentric molecule fragrances. This one really was a sleeper hit for Juliette Has a Gun and really put their brand on the map, really. People knew the brand from Not a Perfume just because it was just such a strange name for a fragrance. Chanel also had a huge hit in 2010 with Bleu de Chanel. Bleu de Chanel really ushered in the blue fragrance trend, which would actually result in the release of Sauvage by Dior later on in the 2010s. Looking at my own fragrance collection, the one that stood out to me from 2010 was Mugler's Womanity. So this fragrance just is in this really distinctive, really strange looking bottle, has odd things on it like women's faces. It looks a little bit Mad Max with this chain. And this fragrance is just so distinctive. It's something that I think had a lot of people wanting to try it because it has this caviar note in it. And it is a fig fragrance. It's something that I think is relatively friendly, but I know that a lot of people have a love or hate thing going on with this fragrance. So I think it's gone now, but if you haven't tried it and you do spot it, it's well worth giving it a sniff. Also released on the niche market that year was Portrait of a Lady by Frederic Malle. Frederic Malle had a huge hit with Portrait of a Lady because it had that really special thing where it's loved by both women and men. And that's really essential to have a huge hit in fragrance, I think. I think you need that market share to be just bigger, especially in niche fragrance. Also launching in 2010 were fragrances such as Chanel Eau Tendre, also Balenciaga Paris, the ultimate cold violet fragrance, and the summer freshie Acqua de Gioia. So next 10 years ago, back in 2015, I was 31 and I was actually doing my PhD. I remember being about halfway through my PhD at that point. I was writing my first papers. So at the time, Barack Obama was in the White House and David Cameron was Prime Minister of the UK. And that year, Black Lives Matter was really coming to the forefront of people's minds. It was really a campaign that was really growing, especially in the US, but it was spreading around the globe and becoming a really important cultural movement. Also that year, Queen Elizabeth II became the longest reigning British monarch. Music-wise, we were listening to Adele, Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift. And in the cinema, we were watching Spectre and also 50 Shades of Grey. So back in the world of fragrance, it was again niche fragrances that were at the forefront and really the ones that were the most talked about in 2015. So fragrances such as Halfeti from Penhaligon's, which I think is now their most successful fragrance, it really is just so distinctive. And if you have been past a Penhaligon's shop, you will have smelt it because it's really the thing that dominates the smell in the air outside the shop. So Halfeti is a just very distinctive leathery rose oud fragrance with a slight greenness to it. And I think it's just been a huge hit for Penhaligon's. Meanwhile, MFK was releasing Oud Satin Mood, which is a really classy, elegant, warm fragrance of rose, violet, vanilla and oud. Another big hit that year was the honey tobacco of Xerjoff's Naxos. In the designer world, we also saw replica fragrances from Maison Margiela released By the Fireplace. And By the Fireplace is by far their biggest selling fragrance ever. Smoky, literally by the fireplace kind of fragrance. It has sweet touches, but it really is just all centered around that smokiness and also some vanilla, which I think is what makes it so friendly and so liked. When I look at my own collection and the fragrances that I have from 2015, the one that really stands out for me is Tom Ford's Noir Parfum. This fragrance, I think, is sadly missed, but it's a gingery feeling, coffee vanilla fragrance. It's absolutely delicious in the dry down. Just an absolutely gorgeous fragrance, and something that we hadn't really smelt in fragrance before with this line, with the coffee note. It's just really interesting. Another fragrance that I think a lot of people initially wrote off just because it's from a particular brand was Marc Jacobs Decadence. This is just a very inventive designer fragrance and something that is so different from the other fragrances in Marc Jacobs' catalogue. This one is a really dark feeling, syrupy plum fragrance with a vanilla and saffron. And the woodiness in this is the thing that makes this stand out. The vetiver is the thing that makes this pop. And it just feels a very edgy and interesting fragrance, and is something that I think is really sought after now. And finally from 2015 was Lancome's La Nuit Trésor. This fragrance actually feels like it should be older than 2015, but it really was quite a big hit for Lancome, and it spawned a lot of flankers. So this one is a very distinctive mix of the light chi at the beginning with some kind of smoky feeling incense, and also the kind of patchouli base with the vanilla. It's just a very kind of syrupy 2010s kind of style fragrance, but still very loved. So that's Lancome's La Nuit Trésor. So next, let's go back just 5 years ago to 2020. And if we think about 2020, really there was only one thing on most people's agendas for 2020, and that was the pandemic. We really saw it coming from the end of 2019, and we were just waiting for it to impact. And really, it's taught us some valuable lessons about pre-planning and what governments need to do to prevent this kind of thing from being such a huge issue in future. But also, it's taught us the vulnerabilities of humankind. And really, it's also made us aware of human behaviour and how we react to such things. Hopefully that's just a once in a lifetime event that none of us will ever experience ever again. But it really was amazing to see the world come to a complete standstill and just have to shut down to protect humankind. So back in 2020, Donald Trump was in the White House and Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister of the UK. And really our fashion choices in 2020 were reflecting the pandemic. We really mostly bought things like pyjamas, tracksuit bottoms, because most of us were at home. With music, the big hits in 2020 were from people such as The Weeknd, Lewis Capaldi, and also Ariana Grande. In the world of fragrance, a lot of releases got held back, but really blind buying took over during the pandemic. People were sat at home, they were watching YouTube, and there was a lot of blind buying going on with fragrances. In actual fact, the number of fragrances released in 2020 really took quite a nosedive compared with the releases in 2019, and it's taken the fragrance industry a few years to recover. And actually a lot of people were deciding to create YouTube channels and make videos, and actually I was one of those people. So the most anticipated release of 2020, and I really feel like this one is still spoken about warmly 5 years on, is Kilian's Angel Share. I didn't really realise what Angel Share was referring to until very recently. In fact, in the summer, I went to visit a vineyard and they were talking about the Angel Share, which is actually the alcohol that evaporates from the barrel as the wine or brandy or whatever it is, the spirit is maturing. And that's termed the Angel Share because the person making the spirit can no longer get that alcohol back into the barrel. I thought that was a really interesting thing to learn. I honestly had no idea about that. I'm sorry if you all know that, but I didn't. But that was something that I had no clue about. We also had a relatively surprise hit from Kajal. Kajal really are best known now for Le Mar, which was released in 2020, and that's really a kind of almost barbecued pineapple fragrance with a slight greenness and a rosiness. It's such a strange fragrance to me, but I think it's very popular. The big hit for Tom Ford in 2020 was Bitter Peach, which I think is, for someone who isn't massively keen on peach, a beautiful take on peach. It really does exemplify the peach itself very well. You really do smell all the textures of the peach, the fuzziness of the skin. It's just so well done. Even for someone who doesn't like peach can fully appreciate that fragrance as a masterpiece. Other releases from 2020 include the milky feeling vanilla fragrance from Mont Blanc Signature, and what is my favourite release from the replica line of fragrances, Bubble Bath, which is something that has a really nice play on aldehydes and how they're used, and just is the most distinctively bubble bath-like fragrance I've ever smelt. It does have a slight coconutty soap feel to it as well, which I find incredibly nostalgic. 2020 really was the year of coconut. We also got D&G's The Only One Intense, and we also got La Nuit Trésor Nude. So when I looked at my own fragrance collection for releases from 2020, something really struck me, and that was just how far down the Mugler rabbit hole I was. So I have 3 Mugler fragrances that are from 2020. So the first one is Angel Nova, which is a really kind of fizzy feeling raspberry and lychee fragrance with some rose, very distinctively Quentin Biche. The Akagala wood is definitely strong and present in this fragrance. Also, the summer release from the Angel line, which is Angel Eau Croisière. This is a fig and patchouli fragrance. The fig comes off as something almost a little bit pineapple-y almost. Really interesting summer release from Mugler. And the final one that I have is Mirage, which is a kind of metallic feeling floral musk fragrance. Really a very distinctive version of Alien. So yeah, you can see that I was really into Mugler at the time, and I just was buying every single release. And I think this is how you are when you first start with fragrances. You find one thing you love and then you get obsessed by a brand, and then you learn to become a little bit more discerning. So I think this also reflects my own fragrance journey here on YouTube. But yeah, please let me know what you think of these years in fragrance. Really, what stood out to you? Do you have any fragrance memories from 30 years ago or 25 years ago? I'd love to hear your thoughts on these fragrances featured in this video. And thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, then please press the like button, and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.